Well, good morning, everyone. This is Steve Terrelmas. I'm the practice lead for XPM. Welcome to this week's XBR webinar on Atlassian Enterprise Governance. If this is your first time joining us, we do a webinar once a week, every week at this time, Thursday, 11 a.m. Central. All of our webinars are on our website, and they're all free. So feel free to join us anytime on these webinars. But today we're going to talk about Atlassian Enterprise Governance. So let's jump right in. First of all, let's talk a little bit about where we are going in this webinar. So the purpose of this webinar is really going to be about talking about the idea of governance, governance at a strategic level and governance at a tactical level. So what do I mean by that? So strategic, the 10,000 foot level, tactical, how we actually visualize governance on a day-to-day within our operations, okay? So some of the things you're going to see on this screen that I'm showing you are some of the places and different pages and screens and demos that I'm going to show you later on in the webinar. This is the tactical side of governance. This is the governance reports, the governance information, the governance documentation that we are going to realize for our company to make sure that everybody understands what governance means to us, make sure it's openly visible, and make sure that people know where to go when they want to learn about governance, or they know what to do if they want to do something that falls within the governance paradigm. So this is where we're going to go to. This is kind of what I call the ground level. But before we get there, let's take it from the top at the 10,000 foot level, and let's have a little bit of a conversation around what is governance. And specifically, what is governance as it relates to Atlassian tools and as it relates to your organization? Okay, so what is your enterprise governance? Well, I like to kind of represent governance as a rocket ship. So each of you are working in a company. Presumably that company has some goals, some trajectories that they're trying to accomplish. One of them being revenue, maybe being growth, other things like taking care of their employees and things like that, right? This is what our companies do, right? To be successful, to be sustainable, to grow. That's a rocket, right? But a rocket by itself can be a little bit dangerous and out of control. And so we need a control tower. And the control tower in this example somewhat represents the idea of governance. So in that control tower, we are bringing to bear on the rocket a certain amount of elements that hopefully do not detract from the rocket's success, but actually provide some protection, some mitigation, some boundaries, some capabilities to enhance the trajectory of that rocket where it can be the best that it can be. So what are some of those things? And I kind of, in a fun way, put together an acronym here for rocket in the different ways that my control tower helps facilitate my company's rocket ship with good governance. So let's talk through what some of those are. First of all, representation. Good governance should always have the right kinds of representation. We don't want representation only from executive level. That's too top down, too heavy-handed, and it's not really going to harmonize with what your people are trying to do to make your company valuable. Also, you're missing out completely on the value and information that can be brought to bear on your governance process from the grassroots if you don't have the right representation. So representation is critical. The second one is openness. Openness is the idea that whatever we do in governance, we want it to be readily available for people to see. So a couple of examples of that, and we'll get into this later on in the webinar, is if there's a governance activity that's happening, we want people to know and be able to see that activity, what's happening with that activity, who's participating in that activity, etc. But of equal importance is the ability for people to know how to get involved in a governance activity. What if somebody wants to participate in a governing body? What if somebody wants to submit a request for improvement in process or a request for an additional product, right? Do they know very easily how to start that process, where to go to get that process going, right? That's openness. So openness should achieve both of those goals. Thirdly is coordination. Coordination just means that as we are moving forward with our ideas and issues around governance, that the processes and the tools that we are using are facilitating the ability for the people that need to know about it and need to be involved in it. It's facilitating that activity. And so that's coordination. And then knowledge is going to be around the idea of making sure we know what we're doing, right? So again, this kind of goes back to the idea of representation. If you're going to incorporate governance into your enterprise, you need to make sure there are people involved in that governance that know what they're doing. Do they know the products? If you have a request to your governing team to purchase another add-on or to change the way maybe a standard workflow is accomplished, do you have enough people in your governing body with enough knowledge to know whether or not that's a good idea or not? And then the next one is experience, right? So the difference between knowledge and experience is knowing what to do and the wisdom of applying it. I always use the joke that knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, and experience or wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So we need people that have been in the tools for a while, people that have seen things, understand things, people that understand your company, people that understand your rocket, people that know how to bridge the gap between what's happening with the tool and the governance of that tool and what's happening with your rocket and the value of your company. People that can draw those conclusions well are the level of expertise or wisdom that we want as part of our governing process also. And then finally, teamwork. Teamwork is very important, making sure that people are openly vulnerable with each other with conversations, making sure that people are working together to provide collaboration and all these other things. It's always interesting to me, Atlassian's stock ticker is TEAM, T-E-A-M, because that's how they want their product to be viewed, as a team building product, right? So representation, openness, coordination, knowledge, expertise, and teamwork together, they spell rocket. And this is a framework for promoting the success of your company, aligning strategies, improving your processes, other things like that. So this is kind of our goal, right? It's a very pie in the sky goal. It's a very allegorical goal. It doesn't really have anything to do with how we're dealing with day-to-day operations. It looks great on paper, but what does this really mean as far as what governance is and how that applies to the tools and the processes that we use on a day-to-day basis? All right, so let's take this down a little bit further toward the ground level. Let's start off with a vision. This is a vision that I've come up with for governance. You maybe come up with your own. You're welcome to use this one if you like it. But the governance vision in my mind is to ensure that we have an ongoing balance between the enterprise goals and the enterprise growth via flexible controls managed directly by the employees who best understand the purpose and value of Atlassian products across the organization. Now, for the most part, this presentation and webinar is going to be focusing on enterprise governance tools utilizing Atlassian. But if you use other tools as well, like Google or Microsoft or Oracle, any type of enterprise software tools that you use, you can apply these principles, right? The point of our vision is really twofold. We want that balance, right? We are going to be trying to facilitate the most success for our rocket, which means that's going to be our enterprise goals and our enterprise growth. We want that balance to be tied together with flexible controls. We don't want it to be rigid. We want them to make sense. And then the second part is that we want our employees to be a main motivating factor for those flexible controls. If your employees, the people that understand your business, the people that operate on the ground level, the people that understand the tools because they use them day in, day out, if they are the ones that are influencing your Confluence or your governance structure, then they're going to be flexible controls because your employees understand what needs to happen from a control standpoint in order to work successfully at the ground level so that your rocket can be successful. So that's a good vision. Like I said, if you like it, use it. If you like parts of it, use parts of it. You're welcome to take any or all of that. Next thing is the purpose of governance. What are we really trying to accomplish here? And again, this is from the perspective of Atlassian, but you can use it for other enterprise tools as well. So the governance body, this concept of governance that we're building out, their primary purpose is going to be to support the creation, discussion, decision, and implementation of Atlassian products, apps, components, and configuration. Okay, it's a mouthful that basically means everything in your Atlassian ecosystem as far as the tools are concerned, the governing body is going to be supporting the processes and the people around those tools, right? So you're going to have various creation of ideas, various discussion around these ideas, decisions that are made. What parts of our tools need to be standardized versus what parts need to be customized? How is that different from one division to another? How does that change depending on how big or small our company is? How many people, how many admins should we have? How many cooks should be in the kitchen? Like all of these ideas, these questions, these things that are important need to be discussed and decided. These are going to be the purpose of our governance in order to facilitate that successfully. And by facilitate it, sometimes that means the purpose of the governance body will be to get out of the way and to let people do their job, right? But that's the idea of the governance purpose. Okay, so those are our governance vision and our governance purpose. We're continuing to get down to the practical day-to-day life. So let's take another step further down into the ground level and talk a little bit about the governance goals and components. So what we're doing in this slide is we are breaking out the tangible products that are in place and the tangible processes that hopefully your governance team will be able to build and facilitate on a day-to-day basis. We're getting really close to that ground level now. So what are some of the tools in place? Well, you've got Confluence. So what are some of the governing principles that we want to implement in Confluence? Some of those governing principles may be the governance around space regulation. If you operate in Confluence, you know that there are not a lot of administrative parameters around Confluence. Once people create a space, they can pretty much do whatever they want in that space. So how do we protect our company from having multiple spaces that should all be one space and multiple spaces that have the same information repeated over and over again, so that when somebody really needs to see that information or understand what's the latest version of that information, they're not chasing that across multiple spaces and wondering if they actually have even captured the latest one, right? So ideas around the governance of spaces, what spaces should be micro spaces like personal spaces or maybe project spaces, what spaces should be macro spaces like maybe a governance space or a company-wide vision space, right? How do we want to manage those spaces? That's a really important concept around Confluence. That's important to set up early on before you have a mess in your Confluence instance. So that's an example of governance with Confluence. Jira governance. Here, the classic one on this one is how many admins do you need in Jira, right? As a general rule of thumb, when we consult with folks, XPM tells people that if you're 1 to 200 users, you probably really only need 1 or 2 admins. And maybe adding another admin for every 500 or every 300 to 500 users that you have after that. That's a goal that works well for us. We find that the administration of Jira can change. If somebody is just starting to use Jira, they have a tendency to have a lot of admins. Like if you're the first 50 users that they have or the first 100 users that they have, there's a temptation to have 10 or 20 admins. If you pursue that path, it's very likely you're going to get into a situation where admins are creating their own database elements without any standardization, and very quickly you have a mess in your database, right? So what is the governance around Jira? And so that's one example of some of the governance. The other one would be things like what are standard workflows versus customized workflows, ideas like that. Source control governance, Bitbucket. Other source control tools, whether you're going to use Bitbucket or you're going to use something like GitLab, right? Many source control tools integrate very well with Atlassian tools. If you have multiple source control tools, how do you standardize those? How do you consolidate onto one tool, right? All of those can be governance ideas around source control. Portfolio governance. So Atlassian has a lot of portfolio tools. So besides the general reporting that comes out of projects in Jira, you have advanced roadmaps that can pull together project forecasts or multiple project forecasts or multiple team forecasts. Of course, there's Jira Align, which is your scaled agile platform for portfolio management. So a lot of different tools there, and very important that we look at the governance around those tools as well. When are we ready for advanced roadmaps? How broad should our advanced roadmaps be? How many should we have? Who manages our advanced roadmaps? When are we ready to move into Jira Align? What does that mean as far as the use of advanced roadmaps? Are we doing away with advanced roadmaps, or are we supplementing Jira Align with advanced roadmaps? So lots of questions around that that could have governance impacts. So Confluence, Jira, Source Control, and Portfolio, those are 4 examples of products in the Atlassian ecosystem. There are others, but it's going to be really important that your governance structure at the ground level has a good template, a good process, a good set of information around how each of these tools are governed, what parts of these tools are standard, what parts of these tools are customized, that general idea. And of course, going back to our rocket model, openness. Where does this live? Is everybody know where to find this information, right? If there's a new division in your company that wants to join the Jira instance, do they know what they need to do to join it? Do they know what they need to do in order to work with the admin to build out a new project in Jira for their division? Do they know what requirements are there, what standardization there, all of that stuff? Okay, let's talk about the bottom bubbles that we have here. These are some of the processes that are going to be involved in our governance tools. So Atlassian governance policies. What policies do we have in place around governance? Best practices. What have we learned from the past, and how are we applying those, what we've learned from the past, for best practices for what we are requiring or recommending from a governance process? Governing bodies. How are our governing bodies structured? Who's in our steering committee? Do we have other governing bodies? Depending on the size of your instance or the size of your enterprise software product, do you need 1 governing bodies or 3 governing bodies or a hub and spoke system of governing bodies, right? Those are all conversations that need to happen around governing bodies. How about the Atlassian governance framework tools? How are we going to visualize all this on the ground level? How are we going to make this obvious and easy for people to see directly what's happening, how to do things, who's involved in governance? One click of a button away should get people to where they need to go, right? So what framework do we build this entire governance process around so that it can be used well? And then how-to articles. Again, as people bring things into the ecosystem, let's just say again, the Atlassian software tools, what are the requirements that we're putting on people that bring this in from the perspective of things like how-to articles? In other words, if a team wants to build an add-on and bring an add-on in from the Atlassian marketplace, are we requiring that team to build the how-to document to use that add-on in case another team wants to use it as well, right? Okay, so these are our governance goals and components that are really getting close to this ground level because they're really focusing on processes and tools that are being used day to day by the people that are in your company that are using tools like Atlassian to make their rocket successful. We have 4 goals within this level of component that we always want to drive toward. Those goals are listed in the middle of this diagram. They are scalable growth, right? Don't build anything unless it can scale. Because I'll tell you right now, if you are just getting involved in the Atlassian ecosystem, just beware, it will scale. It will scale quite a bit. Atlassian has done a brilliant job of building a tool that can serve everyone in your organization. Even though you may not have the vision for that yet, you will probably get there. And it's all collaborative within the same platform, which gives it a lot of power. So everything we do in the governance standpoint among the processes and tools should be scalable. Second thing is visible control. This gets back to the point of what is your framework for governance so that anybody that needs to know information or process information around the governance process can find that easily. It's openly visible. Then third is user ownership, right? This goes back to the idea of ownership. We want people involved in the governance process at all levels. We need executive people, especially if we need to make purchases or make big decisions. We need users, especially people that have a lot of experience in the tools, to make sure that we sidestep any landmines or don't get involved in something that is going to really not be scalable, right? And then finally, knowledge sharing. One of the most important things that the governance process should facilitate is the ability for a piece of information that comes into your organization to be disseminated quickly across the entire organization, to be there. Confluence is a brilliant tool for this because it's not only a documentation tool, it's also a content portal, right? So one of the brilliant things about Confluence is that if somebody is looking for a piece of information, the macros in the tools that exist within Confluence allow you to create visibility pages so that person can not only find that piece of information quickly, but can also find anything else that is in the knowledge base around that information. He may be looking for something and may not even realize that there is more relevant or more up-to-date information out there. And as he goes into Confluence and researches what he's looking at, because the fact that we've built Confluence the right way with good governance as a knowledge portal, he's able to see on that page I'm looking at this, but guess what? There's an update that came out 6 months ago. I wasn't even aware of that. Or there's a better document out there, or there's a better process, or there's a new standard in place, right? This is how we can create knowledge sharing in a way where one piece of information or one question can be quickly moved to the place where people are getting the most information, the most up-to-date information. And of course, knowledge sharing is incredibly efficient, right? Instead of having the person sitting at the desk that knows everything about one thing and everybody's got to go find him and find time on his schedule and book meetings on his calendar. No, it's out there, it's openly visible, so that that person's knowledge can actually be disseminated without that person taking time away from their day to do it, right? Okay, so scalable growth, visible control, user ownership, knowledge sharing. We are constantly driving toward these goals as we're working through the day-to-day operations around the processes and the tools for our Atlassian governance. Hopefully, as we're going down further and further down to the ground level, you're beginning to catch the vision here of how these ideas of good governance are actually beginning to apply on the day-to-day operations. One more slide, and then I'm going to make a switch and take you right to a framework that we've built out in governance so I can actually show you how this works real time with people. So let's talk real quick about governance pillars. These are kind of the three main areas of governance that you need to think about and consider. The first one is your governance structure. The second one is your governance framework. And the third one is your governance policy. So what do I mean by that? Governance structure is going to be who's involved in your governance. What are your governing bodies? Who's involved in those governing bodies? That's your structure. Your framework is the where does your governance live? So this is going to be the tools that you're going to apply towards your governance structure. Are those tools going to be email? Are they going to be Excel spreadsheets, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to show you in a minute how Atlassian actually answers this question for us, because the tools that Atlassian provide for us are brilliant in creating this governance framework so that you don't need email, you don't need spreadsheets, you don't need phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. And you don't even need meetings. I'm going to show you that in a minute too. Okay, governing policies. What are your policies? What have you built out as standard policies? What areas are a little bit more open? Okay, so these are kind of the areas to think about as you build out your governance structure in your organization. What is my people? What is my framework, or where things live? And what are my policies, or what governing principles am I going to apply? Okay, so we are going to be, we're going to continue to move in. The next thing I want to talk about is, actually, I'm going to do a quick parenthetical for you and tell you a little bit about us. So I always tell people this when I talk to them. Why are you listening to somebody called XPM when you're interested in things like Atlassian, right? I talk to people about this all the time when I get on sales calls with people or when I'm at conferences and things like that. So let me talk a little bit about that real quick. Atlassian has right now almost 250,000 companies around the world that use their software. They are a huge company. Their market share right now it keeps going up. It actually jumped up significantly the other day with their earnings call. I think their stock price went up about $50, but they're about 50 or 60 billion dollars. $50 or $60 billion in market cap. So very large company. Along with that comes a marketplace that has 3,000 add-ons in it. So a very rich ecosystem. Atlassian has been around for about 20 years. Very early on, they decided and realized that we make great software, but we need a partner network to manage things like consulting, knowledge, training, sustainability of our customers, success of our customers. So they built out a really good partner network, and there are currently 500 partners around the world in varying degrees. XPM is one of those partners, and that's why you're hearing from us instead of from somebody at Atlassian. Atlassian does have some training too, but XPM is a platinum solutions partner. That means that we have a number of people that are fully certified in Atlassian tools. We've reached a certain threshold of license sales, all this other good stuff. I won't bore you with the details on that right now. All you need to know is that if you come to XPM, we can help you out with all of your Atlassian needs, period. So let me talk about 4 of those specifically. Training, actually, that's where we started many years ago, is people would come to us and say, hey, do you know anything about this Atlassian, this Jira tool? So we started training classes, and we still do training classes. We do about 5 or 6 public training classes every month, and we also do private training as well. Our training, by the way, I like to think is unique because we don't give you PowerPoint slides. So if you come to our class, you're not going to be seeing a bunch of slides like I'm showing you right here. You will be a user in a tool doing workshops. That's our training. So we call it hands-on workshop-based training. Okay, check it out on our website, xpm.com, if you're interested in that. Consulting, of course, we will consult in any area, whether it's ITSM, Agile at Scale, just building a Jira project, Confluence stuff, source control. If you need to do migrations from server to cloud, by the way, if you are on server, come to our cloud migration webinar. You need to move off a server within the next 18 months. Okay, so consulting, we do all that. Custom development. XPM grew out of a deep technical full stack software development company. Their name is Oasis Digital. They're still our sister company. That gives us a tremendous opportunity to be able to build technical solutions for people in the Atlassian ecosystem. I'll give you an example of this. We've worked with a major, one of the major automobile industries. We were able to build a portal that sits on top of their Atlassian instance so that when they're managing their inventory of cars, they can go on their phone, they can see the cars, they can check out the cars, they can fill out information in the cars, view things like the VIN numbers and all this kind of thing on the car, right? And all of that is living on top of the workflow and database of Atlassian tools. They don't even see Jira or Confluence. They just see the portal that sits on top. So we've done that several times with customers. We can also help people out with custom integration, custom scripting for automation, all kinds of stuff like that. And then finally, licensing. Let me just say with licensing, if you're not licensing with a partner, you're leaving money on the table. That's just the way it is. Atlassian has done something unique with their partners because they want to have a good relationship with their partners, and they want their partners to be able to successfully help customers for the long haul. They have given partners the ability to have competitive licensing. Anytime you buy a license from a partner, the rate that you will get will be equivalent or better to what Atlassian can offer you. I'm not kidding you. If you don't believe me, send me an email. I'll show you. And so that's the important thing about licensing, but that's not even the value proposition, right? The value proposition with licensing is that if you're licensing with a partner like XPM, now you have a direct line to a full-scale Atlassian consultant for questions, for projects, for support service agreements, all that kind of thing. We'll also do things like budgetary estimates. We send you guys automatic notices 60 days, 30 days before your license is expiring. All of those services are free in our licensing department. So if you're not licensing with a partner like XPM, give me a call, send me an email. Let me just show you what we can do with that. I guarantee you, you'll be happy with that. Okay, enough of the advertisement. Let me switch back to governance. I'm going to jump right into the tool, and I'm going to show you how you can apply these governing principles directly within the Atlassian tools for your company's day-to-day operations that are going to facilitate and are going to enhance the rocket ship that you're working on to try to make your company valuable. So let me cruise into that here. I'm going to start off in Confluence. Okay, what am I doing here? So Atlassian has got a number of tools. Two of them are Jira and Confluence. I presume everybody on this call is familiar with these tools. In case you're not, high level, Jira is how we get things done. Confluence is how we learn things or how we manage content, right? Okay. So both of those high-level tools are fantastic for governance. So let's start with Confluence, how we know things, how we learn things, how we communicate things. This is an example of a governance space. I'm going to recommend to you, if you are using Confluence, make sure all of your governance activity is in one macro space. We talked about this earlier with governance around Confluence. What spaces should be micro, what spaces should be macro. The governance space should be a macro space. In fact, I even recommend that companies make this a public space to the rest of your employees. Not 100% of your employees are likely in Jira or in Confluence or using Atlassian tools, but I bet some of the employees that are not using Atlassian tools are seeing Atlassian tickets in their email or whatever, are interested about what Atlassian means, and may in the future be involved in Atlassian. So you want to get ahead of that on information and share with those people information about Atlassian processes and standards and things that they can do in Atlassian tools long before they're ever even using the Atlassian tools. Okay, so one governance space. Let me give you an example of how you might want to structure this space, especially along those three pillars I was talking about before. First of all, main page, right? Telling people what we're doing here. What's the purpose of governance? Maybe targeting them to some specific articles or videos around governance, okay? By the way, this is a good time for me to mention our YouTube page. If you want to know more information about governance, XPM for about 2 years traveled around the country with Atlassian and Google and did several governance forums. We captured a number of the modules from those forums and put together a watch list on our YouTube channel around governance. If you go to YouTube, type in XPM, go to the list of videos, and you'll see our governance forum there with a bunch of videos on it. But providing information right off the top of the page here around governance. Maybe some quick visuals, right, to help people understand some of the strategic ideas or thoughts around how you manage governance. Okay, over here in your tree, we've got our areas of our different pillars that we were talking about. The first pillar, of course, being the framework, which we're in right now. The second pillar being the governance structure. So let's take a look at our governance structure. So a governance structure is how we are managing people in the governance process, right? Lots of information here. Let me just kind of drill down on a few key pieces. First of all, I want to show you this. This is an example of how you might want to structure your governance people. You can do it this way if you want to. You don't have to. This works well for a Atlassian infrastructure of anywhere between maybe 200 to 1,000 users. Once you get beyond 1,000 users, you may need a hub and spoke governance process where you have a core group here that's a steering committee, and then you have representation like this in different divisions throughout your organization. It's up to you. Let me talk a little bit about what we're doing here, though. I've got 3 governing bodies here: the steering committee, the product admin group, and the system admin group. The steering committee is probably going to be comprised of 3 to 5 people. Very high level, doesn't even make all the decisions, makes the biggest decisions. Maybe the executives are there for writing the checks, right? It's going to be for basic governance management and for purchasing, right? Also, maybe there'll be communication and response with the other governing groups. These guys are probably only going to meet once or twice a year. They're probably only going to need to come together or make a decision when there's a large purchase that needs to be done, or something like a large initiative like, hey, we need to move from server to cloud, right? They may be involved in that. Underneath that steering committee is going to be 2 groups: the product admin group, the system admin group. The reason why I've divided these is because we really want in our governance process to be careful to separate between platform and product. Platform is where your tool lives. Product is what your tool does and how your tool is configured. Let me give you some examples. On the platform side, are you operating on-prem, right? Do you have servers in a closet somewhere that's holding this software? Are you operating on an AWS or a Google Cloud platform? Are you operating as an Atlassian cloud, software as a service? What is the platform that this is living on? That's going to have a significant effect on your governance. Why? Well, if you're Atlassian software as a service, you don't have a lot of system admin things. Atlassian's managing all that. But if you're doing on-prem, like data center, when you're managing your own servers, you have an entire hardware and people collection that is managing that system. That is a big impact on governance. Things like Active Directory, things like email admin, things like system admins. How are those tying together with what's happening in the Atlassian system? A specific example of this is user management. When we acquire a new company or we bring in a new team, how is that team being implemented through Active Directory or through groups and roles, through the tools? How are we bringing them in? Okay, so your system admin group is really going to cover like users. And what I mean by users here is I mean getting users into the tool, not necessarily how the users have permissions in the tool. That's more the product side, but getting users in the tool. Hardware management, if you're using hardware, security, compliance, user access, all that kind of thing. This is going to be a very large group of people because you're going to have a lot of systems people that may have other jobs in the company, but have to come in periodically to deal with governing issues around the system if you have it on-prem or something like that. So the meeting cadence of this, or the people that need to be involved in the meetings, they may be a little bit sporadic, right? Depending on the particular issue, you may not have the entire governing body involved in these meetings. You may only need 1 or 2 people from the system admin group, or sometimes you may need all of them. The product admin group is going to focus on things like the actual functionality and configuration of the software, the tool security, like who's in groups, who's in roles, who can see what projects and things like that. And then user management within the tool. This is going to be your product admin group. It's going to be a smaller number of people, but they are going to be more directly involved on a day-to-day with what's happening on the ground level. A great example of how these groups apply to a situation, a use case study, would be something like an add-on. Let's suppose you want to buy ScriptRunner, okay? So the Atlassian product admin group would be involved in the decision as to whether or not you're going to buy ScriptRunner. And we'll talk about this a little bit when we get into Jira, because Jira is where actions take place, right? So if we're going to make a choice to build an add-on, we need a governance ticket to process that choice, that decision, that workflow. We'll get into that in a minute. But the product admin group is going to be involved in the process of deciding whether or not to buy ScriptRunner. The system admin group may be involved in implementing the add-on into the tool, adding the add-on into the tool, maybe even involved in processing that add-on in the tool, turning on the initial permissions as to who has the system permissions for using ScriptRunner and things like that, right? So again, not necessarily how you have to do it. This I've worked with several companies on, and it works out really, really well, especially again, if you're at that 200 to 1,000 user level. If you're less than 200, you probably just need one governing body that's just doing all of this. Down here at the bottom is kind of a foundational element that represents all the users in the Atlassian ecosystem in your company that are going to be like project managers, product managers, development managers, super users, team leads, coaches, scrum, anybody that is there. And the people in that group that actually have a good understanding of the tool, have experience with the tool, are leading teams, are product owners, they will probably be liaisoning into the governing bodies with needs, requests, concerns, et cetera, et cetera. And this is important, many of those people may actually be representatives within these groups, right? If you've got a super user or a team lead, he may not only be operating as a user of the tool, he may be one of the 5 or 10 people that's in your product admin group as well. So keep that in mind, because we want to have grassroots governance. So the best way to do that is to pull the key people from this base into the different governing bodies. Okay, so that's an example of how you can structure your governing body, the people in your governing body. How do you make that visible? Well, for example, the steering committee. Let's take a look at the steering committee. Here we go. So again, this is a public space. So anybody who's interested in learning about the steering committee can come to the steering committee. They can learn about their purpose, their structure. They can see the members that are in the steering committee. Oh, look, we have an open position in the steering committee. And actually, this is a Jira ticket, because an open position goes through a voting process, which is an action. So that lives in Jira. I'll show you that in a second. But we have a ticket out there. We have some meeting notes from previous steering committees. How about the product admin group? Same thing. We have our purpose, our structure, and the people that are involved in the product admin group. This is the purple section in that triangle. And again, many of these people are going to be grassroots people, people that are actually working day to day in various pillars of your company, and the different roles that they may have. And then you're going to have a system admin group, and that. So anybody that's interested in knowing about the governing bodies is going to be able to come here and see what each body is, what they do, and who the people are involved. Okay. You might also have in there like a decision log. What are some of the decisions that are coming up, right? Have those decisions been made? What's the activity that's happening in those decisions? Okay, governing structure. Let's talk a little bit about policies. This is the third pillar that I showed you on the slide. What are policies? Well, policies are going to be standards and processes that you do in order to provide whatever standardization or controls that you need to, right? Here's an example of a standardized Jira project setup. If you have a new team coming into Jira, maybe they need to work through a workbook that helps the Jira admin understand how they want their project set up. What are some of the things that this team is going to do? Issue type. How are they going to accomplish that? Workflows. What fields and screens do they need? By the way, if you're familiar at all with Jira, you'll immediately recognize that each of these boxes tie together with an element in the Jira admin database that is required in order to build out a project. We go through this entire diagram in depth as a workshop in our Jira Bootcamp class that we have. If you're an admin and you want to learn more about this, check out our Jira Bootcamp class online. It's probably one of our most popular classes out there. What are some of the policies and standards that are out there? We've broken it up in this website by administrators and users. Like, how do we archive projects? What are database element maintenance? How do we manage integrations? And then what are some of the policies and standards around users, right? So what are workflows? How do we use workflows? What are our standards around workflows? What statuses, resolutions, and priorities? In other words, if you are new, if you are building a project, know that when you come to building your workflows, there are going to be some governance requirements around things. In other words, when you move to your ultimate status, we are going to require you to select a resolution, things like that, right? Policies for add-ons. We're working in our tool and we want to build an add-on. How does that work? What do I do if I want to build an add-on, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And then there might also be policies that are in progress. These are things that we're still working on. By the way, this is actually, you'll notice what just happened there. When I pulled this page up, and this is what's so brilliant about Confluence, it is a content portal. It is not a documentation tool. It has documents, but documents are a subset of it. What you're seeing here is a filter out of Jira. Why? Because if policies are in progress, that is an action that is happening. So we are tracking that action in Jira. We are visualizing it for everybody to see in Confluence. I'll get to that more later when I get into Confluence. But look, every single one of these is an issue type in Jira. And if I click on one, it'll take me right over to what's happening in Jira. I can see the statuses that are happening in Jira. I can see whether it's resolved or not. I can see who's assigned to it, who reported it, all that great stuff. Open visibility, one of the key points to successful governance. Finally, things like how-to articles. As people learn things, put a requirement out there. Somebody did a Zephyr build out, great. Have him build out some sort of high-level how-to article, right? So other people can learn how to use Zephyr as well, things like that. You can go on and on with this. This is all I'm going to show you on Confluence today. Here's another example, though. Let's suppose you're implementing a governance process, an action that requires a lot of information. You could add another main item here on your tree in the governance space, documenting the implementation of the governance process. Why are we doing it? What are some of the governance standards that we're putting together? What are the governing bodies we're putting together, right? And embedded in that could be the actions around that implementation, like a roadmap. Where are we in our roadmap? We're implementing a governance process over 6 months. We're in month number 2. You can overlay a roadmap into a Confluence page, so anybody that wants to track real time how the governance implementation process is happening, they come to the governance implementation item here, they pull up the roadmap, they say, oh, this is where we are in the roadmap, these are the tasks we've completed, these are the tasks that are pending, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now I'm going to jump over into the action side of the world. I've been talking a lot about the information in the governance space. Now I'm going to talk about the actions around governance that happen on a day-to-day basis. Okay, I'm starting this part on the main project page. And the reason why I am is because it's always a good reminder to show you how collaborative Atlassian tools are. This is why Atlassian lands and expands across organizations. This is why you need to have a public Confluence space for people that are not in Atlassian yet, because eventually they will be. Look at the groups that have emerged and have evolved into our Atlassian instance. I've got accounting. Oh, here's my governance. I've got engagements. I've got HR service desk. I've got a facilities service desk. I've got IT service desk. I've got my DevOps team, Scale Team Alpha, Scale Team Beta, Scale Team Charlie. I've got my initiatives. I got my Epic. It's all in one package. So not only can you see it all, it can be collaborative. I can link an accounting ticket to an HR ticket so that there's reference points between the two. I can connect my scaled agile teams to my epics and things like that, right? Same thing is true with governance. It lives right in the middle of that package as part of a collaborative tool. Let's take a look at what we can do in the governance project. Of course, you have boards, so you can see at a glance what activities are happening in the governance project. You also have a list of issues. These are open issues that are being worked on. You can actually, if you want to understand better, and this is something that only the project manager can see, but I recommend you pull this out and visualize it over on your Confluence side so people know what the heck's going on, right? So in the governance project, we are going to have a series of activities that are happening, right? And so one of the things that's going to be happening is the different types of issues that we can manage in the governance process, right? So here's a list of possible actions that you might be managing on a day-to-day basis within governance. Policies, right? What kind of policies do you have around governance? Whether that policy is an annual policy or it's going through a policy change, okay? Nomination, in this case, this is a nomination of somebody in the governing body, right? For example, we have a gap in the product admin group, so we're going to create a Jira ticket telling everybody that we have a gap in the product admin group, and then people can nominate it. We can even have people vote right on the ticket, you know, vote for Bob, or I vote for Charlie, or whatever, right? I'll show you some of the workflows. Like, for instance, the nomination workflow is going to go through a process where we nominate people, there's a voting process that happens, and they get appointed or something to that extent. Okay. Purchase, this is an important one. What if we need to purchase a particular add-on? Well, the purchase process may live in the billing or accounting department, or the or a different group altogether. I've put it in governance right now, but it might need to move to whoever's responsible for doing POs and all that kind of good stuff. But the first thing we want to do is make sure we are purchasing the right thing. So we have a user product request. Let me show you how that works. Let's say you're operating in a 2000 instance of Jira, and one of your scaled agile teams decides that they have found a add-on that is the best thing since sliced bread. They want to buy it and use it. Well, don't forget, even though Bob in scaled agile team Charlie thinks this is the best thing since sliced bread, as soon as that add-on gets purchased, you are now getting billed on that add-on for 2000 users, because add-ons are billed based on the base product, right? So we don't want Bob just to go out and buy this thing, because we'll incur a large cost. What would be a good way to achieve our goals for governance? Well, we want open visibility, we want knowledge sharing, right? We want collaborative activity, we want grassroots activity, right? So here's a good workflow that supports that governance goal. First of all, Bob can open a ticket for something like this, whatever this add-on is, right? Let's just call it, Jira miscellaneous workflow extensions, right? JMWE, right? Then he may need to do some research. How are we going to use this tool? How much does this tool cost? What does he think would be the broader uses of this tool across the organization versus just his team? The next thing Bob can do is gather interest, right? Why waste our governing body's time every single time somebody has an idea about an add-on? They'd be meeting every single week. Why not instead have the people that are interested in the add-on garner interest from the rest of the organization, so that the governing body is only considering those add-ons that actually have a broader level of popularity, right? So Bob can go out and gather interest. He can have interest on his scaled agile team. He can go talk to other scaled agile teams. He can even extend it to the accounting team or the marketing team, or anybody else that might benefit from this tool. They can then in turn go out to the Jira ticket and vote on the Jira ticket. If you got 2000 users, maybe then you can say once a ticket achieves 200 votes, it will automatically be moved into the backlog for the governance steering committee or the governance product admin group to consider. At that point, Bob presents it to the governing body. Governing body says, no, we don't want it for whatever reason. We think it's a good idea. We're going to put it on hold, or maybe we're going to purchase it, right? One of three options, right? Now, this is a good point to point out that what's brilliant about this tool is not only are we managing process in an openly visible way, we are also creating a database for the future. Back here when Bob created this for JMWE, maybe we already talked about JMWE a year ago or two years ago. Before Bob even creates this ticket, he should do a search to see if the governing body has ever considered JMWE in the past. He may find that there's already a ticket for it on hold or closed, at which point he can review that ticket before he even starts this process, right? Okay, so then it gets presented, they approve it, it goes to purchasing. That creates a nested workflow with that purchasing issue type I was showing to you earlier. That goes over to the billing group, the purchasing group, whoever processes that from your company. Once it gets purchased, it gets configured. Maybe we need to pull in the system admin governing group in order to configure this tool. We don't know. That can all be tracked in this as well. And then after it's been configured, maybe we go back to Bob and say, congratulations, we bought your product. Now we need you to build a how-to article on it and park that how-to article over here in our governance Confluence space again, right? And then we close the ticket. So a beautiful example of how the something like purchasing an add-on can be used to support all of those governance goals that we need, including actions, open visibility, documentation, shared knowledge, grassroots motivation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that is an example of how we would use governance at the ground level on day-to-day activities and actions. So governance, again, is going to be comprised of high-level goals that are implemented through a framework. Highly recommend Atlassian's Jira and Confluence for day-to-day operations that are going to achieve those goals of open visibility, knowledge sharing, scalable growth, et cetera, et cetera. All right, this gets us to close to the end of our webinar today. I will readily admit that I probably flew through this webinar at 100 miles an hour. If you're watching this on YouTube, you may have difficulty listening to it at 2x, right? I tend to talk fast when I get excited. But if any of these ideas that I've shared with you are sparking interest, reach out to us. Let us know. We can help you with this. Let me just share with you one last slide here. This is what I want to share with you. A couple of things on here. Okay, so here's my email address, steve.terrelmus@xpm.com. Here's a QR code for more information about me. If anything we talked about is of interest to you, if you've been thinking about implementing the governance process and you need help with that, let us know. I'll just let you know what I showed you today, we stood up with a company within a couple of weeks. It is not that difficult to do. The challenge is not standing up the framework and the tools. The challenge is getting your company aligned with good governing principles. So that may be what takes more time, right? If you are approaching this from an executive standpoint, you can be a key motivator for good governance. If you're approaching this from an admin standpoint, you are probably going to need to get an executive sponsor. It is not likely that you can bring something like I showed you to a broader multi-hundred user instance of Atlassian, and everybody's going to get so thrilled about it, they're just going to jump on board right behind you. You're probably going to need to pitch this to an executive and get some executive sponsorship to do it first. We can help you with all of that. When we do governing workshops, governing implementation, we will build out a document for you on all of our governance recommendations. We usually kind of break it up into 3 chunks. We sit down with all the teams and talk to them about governance. We then build out a governance framework. We then go back to the teams and present that framework to the teams. So if you need help with any of that, let us know. Over here is a quick high-level update on all of our upcoming webinars and classes. Today's Atlassian governance. Of course, all of these, you can see what they are. Very valuable, very useful webinars. Check those out if you have any interest in that. Okay, I am going to stop talking at this point. I do appreciate you guys listening. And let me just ask you if you have any questions. If you do have any questions, put it out on the Q&A. We've added a couple of links to the chat. We've got our xpm.com link and our YouTube link out there. Again, if you want to know more about governance, also at a broader strategic level, check out that playlist that we did on those governance forums. Lots of good videos out there. Okay, so what do we got for questions? Feel free to dump some questions in the Q&A box if you have any particular questions for me. Okay, so first question is, great presentation. Where do we go from here if we're just trying to start off, right? Okay, so I mentioned this a little bit at the end of the presentation. You need to decide, is this something you can do on your own or something you need help with, right? If you can do either way, the process is going to be the same. You actually, depending on where you are in the organization, if you're an executive level, you need to start working with your administrators in the Atlassian tools, start sharing these ideas, start building out some ideas around how to do this, right? How to build this out. If you're an admin, I would say reach out to see if you can find an executive sponsor. Try to garner some internal support for that. Get yourself to the place where you've got some momentum and got the approval and the ability for people to do this. Then really start focusing on those frameworks. Build out your Confluence space, build out your Jira project, right? So those are the starting points. Feel free to use some of the things that I showed you today. That's why I showed them to you. I want you to be successful in this. If you need help, if you want to have a conversation with us about helping you build that out, reach out to me, and we can certainly help you with that. Okay, other thoughts or questions before we wrap up? Yeah, here's a quick question on licensing. I know this is a little bit off topic, but how would we how would we work with XPM if we wanted to do licensing? Let me just explain really quickly. You do not contract your licenses with XPM. You are always contracting your licenses with Atlassian. If you are on cloud, there's an Atlassian Cloud Terms of Service that you can view. There's a website. Just do a Google search on Atlassian Cloud Terms of Service and you'll find it, right? Those are the terms of service that you are holding when you have an Atlassian license. I'll just let you know those are non-negotiable. Think about those from like the perspective of when you get an iPhone and you turn on your iPhone and Apple says, "Do you accept?" Right? The answer is yes, I accept, or no. And if you answer no, you don't use your iPhone. That's kind of how Atlassian's terms of services are. I will give you a little bit sneak behind the curtain on that. If you have an instance that's over, I think, 5,000 users, they will allow you to write your own terms of service with Atlassian on that. They'll allow you to negotiate that, but for the most part, those are terms of. So you're not licensing with XPM. XPM is providing to you a licensing service. That service entails information, Q&A, things like quotes, if you need quotes. When you're ready to purchase the license, we will provide you a quote. You will review the quote. Once you're ready for it, you sign the quote or give us a PO. We purchase the license for you, invoice you net 30, you're done. It's that simple. It's a very fast and simple process. Let's see. And again, I will mention, if you're not using a partner, especially like a platinum partner, it does kind of matter whether you're platinum, gold, silver, or just a partner that does licensing. Platinum partners are really the best ones to license with. Just talk to me about that later. I'll tell you why. You really need to reach out to a partner. Okay, question online. Can we get access to your demo environments for Confluence and Jira? Yes and no. The webinars that we do, including this one, are often available on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, you'll see webinars for all the things we talked about. So you can look at the webinar later on and review it and things like that. The demo that we build is part of our services that we do. If you come to, and I'll just tell you, I like being very upfront and honest with people. If you come to me and say, "I love what I saw in your demo," we see this with ITSM a lot. We do ITSM webinars. I love can you build that for me? My response back to you is, are you tolerable with us just building that out of the box? If the answer is yes, we can rip that out for you really quick. We can do that in about 2 weeks. That'll include building out a standard platform and doing some education and training around it, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. Most of the time, though, once we get working with a customer, even if we do build a minimum viable product with them on something like that, most of the time they require follow-up support or follow-up configuration or changes or iterations on that minimum viable product or something like that, which we can do through a support services. But if you liked what I showed you today and you want us to actually replicate that like verbatim in your instance for starters, we could probably do that with building out that minimum viable product and doing like a few training classes within a couple of weeks. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, any other questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, hey, I appreciate everyone joining. Again, reach out to me if you have any other questions, want to talk more about this. Otherwise, have a great day, and we will see you out there in the Atlassian ecosystem.